Hello and welcome to CNBC-TV18. I'm Shereen Bhan. This is our special series, The Bad Medicine. The Indian government has launched a probe into 4 cough syrups manufactured by Haryana-based Maiden Pharma. This after the World Health Organization issued a global alert last night saying that the use of these 4 products could have potentially caused the deaths of 66 children in Gambia. The WHO says that lab analysis of samples of each product confirms that they contain unacceptable amounts of de-ethylene glycol and ethylene glycol as contaminants. As per sources, the WHO alerted the Indian government about its findings, and government sources say the drug regulator has launched a probe into the matter. They add that as per a preliminary inquiry, they find that the company has exported the concerned syrups only to Gambia so far. Now, Maiden Pharma, the company in question, claims on its website that its plants are WHO certified. It lists a certain Dr. Naresh Kumar Goyal as the MD. The website says the company started its operations in the year 1990. Now, DG contamination is a serious threat and one that has unfortunately led to fatalities in India for the past several decades. It has also led to fatalities in many parts of the world. To talk about the epidemic of DEG poisoning and the regulatory lapses that need to be plugged, we will be joined by Dinesh.S.Thakur, public health activist, and Prashant Reddy, lawyer by profession. Both of them have co-authored a book which will be launched soon called The Truth Pill. The book analyzes the actions of institutions that are responsible for the safety and efficacy of the Indian drug supply system. Before I get Mr. Thakur and Prashant Reddy into the conversation, let me go across to my colleague Ekta Batra on the developments that have taken place in the last 24 hours. Ekta, what is the World Health Organization saying, and has the company in question responded to the charges?
The World Health Organization has issued a medical product alert indicating that 4 cough and cold syrups made by Indian-based private pharma company Maiden Pharma could be potentially linked with serious kidney injuries and deaths of 66 children in Gambia. The WHO has said it was conducting further investigation with Maiden Pharma and regulatory authorities in India. WHO has also recommended all countries detect and remove these products, though so far it has been detected only in Gambia. They could have been distributed to other countries. The Indian authorities such as the CDSCO too have acted fast and taken up the matter of Maiden Pharma immediately with concerned state regulatory authorities, and a detailed investigation is launched in collaboration with the state drug controller Haryana. The reason for these 4 cough syrups, which could have caused over 60 children dying in Gambia, is likely due to the drugs containing unacceptable amounts of the toxic substances called diethylene glycol or DEG. DEG is a solvent which is present in numerous formulations, from brake fluids to paints and chemical preparations. It is a highly toxic organic solvent that causes acute renal failure and death when ingested. DEG is not used to manufacture cough syrups, but the contamination arises mostly if the company is manufacturing the drugs uses a low-quality industrial-grade propylene glycol for the cough syrups, where DEG is one of the impurities. Hence, pharma companies need to ensure they are using propylene glycol, which is as per pharma standards, hence safe. Industrial propylene glycol contains high levels of DEG and, if substituted in pharma products, can be toxic. While there could be other factors of contamination such as an overall faulty supply chain, this is probably the most common one, especially when it comes to cough syrups. Lastly, DEG contamination are not new, with cases recorded since the late 1930s. Globally, for India, DEG contamination has been linked to 14 children dying in Chennai, 21 fatalities in Mumbai due to the drug administered containing 18.5% of DEG. In 1998, 36 children between 2 months to 6 years were affected by acute renal failure as a cough drug manufactured by a company in Gurgaon was found to have contained 17% of DEG. 33 of these children died. And as recently as 2 years ago, in 2020, 17 children were hospitalized with renal failure, and more than half died after being administered coal-best PC cough syrup, which contained over 30% of DEG.
Ekta, many thanks for joining us. That is where we currently find ourselves with respect to this particular issue of DEG poisoning. To talk about this issue and take this discussion forward, we're now joined by Dinesh.S.Thakur, public health activist, and Prashant Reddy, lawyer by profession. Both of them, as I mentioned, have co-authored a book, The Truth Pill. My colleague Ekta also with me. Mr. Thakur and Prashant, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. It's good to have you back. I have to say, I got an advance copy of your book, Mr. Thakur, on Monday. I began reading it on Monday. And yesterday, when the news broke, when the WHO put out this global alert, I have to say I had a visceral reaction, a physical reaction, because the prologue of your book talks about the epidemic and the regulatory failure when it comes to DEG poisoning. Dinesh Thakur, let me understand from you, why did you feel the need to address that issue at the very start of your book? And in many ways, is it symptomatic of the lapses that continue?
Thanks, Shereen, and thank you again for this opportunity. Over the 3 years while Prashant and I were writing this book, we never thought that we would start our book marketing campaign on such a ghoulish note. But here we are. I remember talking to you 5 years ago, about the regulatory lapses within our regulatory framework, and nothing seems to have changed. The reason why we've picked this incident in Jammu 2 years ago, where Ekta talked about the fact that this company called Digital Vision, which sold coal-based PC syrup, contained 33% of diethylene glycol. That essentially was the most sort of how would I characterize it? Just probably the worst kind of situation where children, young children, as young as 7 months, 6 months, succumb to acute renal failure because of this particular syrup that was contaminated. The worst part about this is that it's been 2 years now. Nothing seems to have been changed. Yes, the Himachal Pradesh state drug regulator made all the right noises saying that we will do the investigation, as Haryana is doing today. The CDSCO said that they would also do something about it. But here we are, 2 years now. What has happened? Has the company been held liable? Has anything changed as far as the manufacturing process is concerned? Has the CDSCO put out any report that tells us why is it that this adulterated syrup was administered to these young children? We see this pattern repeating time and time again. I mean, just a few hours ago, I saw a tweet out by the All India Association of Druggists and Chemists saying that this company only exports, to overseas countries. They don't sell anything in India. That's a bald-faced lie. Go back and look at the excellent database that the CDSCO runs. There are multiple instances of these companies' drugs failing in India, in Gujarat, in Kerala. I don't even know where to start. The reason why we picked this particular instance, because it is probably symptomatic of the callousness, the responsibility, the complete lack of accountability of the drug regulator when it comes to our medicines drug supply.
Yes, several important issues being raised there, and I want to read out to our viewers an excerpt from the book. And as I said, this is the prologue of an over 500-page book which addresses the issue of DEG poisoning, an issue that has now been red flagged by the WHO in the last 24 hours. It says India has the uniquely depressing record of having had at least 5 major DEG poisoning events. The first took place in Madras in 1972, killing 15 children after they consumed a cough syrup called Pipmol C. And then, of course, it goes on to talk about, as Dinesh and Ekta were mentioning, the incident in Jammu, which was the 5th, in your words, Dinesh Thakur and Prashant, the 5th case of mass poisoning in India on account of DEG. Prashant, let's address that issue. At the heart of the matter, one of the big challenges seems to be that there are multiplicity of regulators involved. In this case, for instance, it is the state government regulator that seems to be supervising, that seems to be overseeing the operations of this company. It is now the national drug regulator talking to the state regulator, and that seems to be at the heart of many of the other violations that Dinesh talked about, including the one of 2019, the last case of DEG mass poisoning that we saw. Is one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest issues that we need to address, the multiplicity and the lack of coordination of regulators at the national and the state level?
Absolutely, Ms. Bhan, you've hit the nail on the head. So this has been a problem right from 1940, when the first drug regulatory law was being drafted in colonial India, where the challenge was on who exactly is going to be in charge of drug regulation. Today, we've landed up in a system where India has a common market for buying and selling drugs. So a drug manufacturer in Himachal Pradesh can reach, Tamil Nadu and Mizoram within a span of a few weeks. But when it comes to regulation, we have a very convoluted system. We have a federated regulatory system where each state has its own regulator. Plus, we have a central regulator that looks after imports and certain other activities. And what happens in such a federated regulatory system is that it becomes very difficult for coordination, interstate coordination. So if you speak to drug regulators down in the south, who actually do a pretty good job, they'll throw up their hands and complain that they can't do anything against a Himachal Pradesh pharmaceutical company because it's the Himachal Pradesh drug regulator that issues a manufacturing license. The only thing that, say, a drug inspector in Tamil Nadu can do is to criminally prosecute that company, but that criminal prosecution takes its own sweet time. A drug inspector in Tamil Nadu cannot even go and raid the manufacturing facility in Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, without the cooperation of the local drug controllers. So you have a system where even states which are interested in cracking down cannot do anything because most of the manufacturing happens in certain excise-free zones in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. And because those state governments are not interested in cracking down on the pharma industry, we continuously see incidents like this.
Mr. Thakur, there seems to be a cultural issue as well when it comes to India, and I want to get your thoughts in it. The fact that we are extremely compliant when it comes to global developers, the US FDA, the European regulators, biosimilar approvals, cancer drug approvals such as Revlimid generic. But on the other hand, there are issues such as these that crop up in the domestic pharmaceutical industry. Do you think that there is some amount of a cultural issue which stops us from compliance and enforcement when it comes to domestic pharma?
Well, culture responds to regulation, right? I think that the bigger issue that we have is that over the last 50 years, we've engendered a dual standard of manufacturing. We comply with the stringent regulations when we export our medicine overseas, right? Many of our manufacturing facilities are US FDA compliant. So we can do that. The problem here is that when you have two different sets of standards, one for export and one for domestic use, and especially when you know that the level of compliance and the level of accountability is sorely lacking when it comes to our local consumption and to export into countries where they don't really have a really good regulatory system. Like we see this in Africa. These kinds of incidents happen, right? We see this Vietnam blacklisted a whole bunch of our drugs a few years ago because they found out that they were substandard. These companies would never dream of doing that to Europe and United States because they know that they have to comply with stringent regulations there. The question I guess we have to ask is that why do we encourage, allow, or why are we satisfied with two different set of standards, right? The same companies that make this product for export comply with a stringent standard, but when it comes to actually, delivering it for our own people here, or to countries where there's not enough, a stricter regulation, we fall, over ourselves, and try and cut corners. So it's a culture, comes from, the way that the regulations have been written, and for far too long, we have closed our eyes. We have always said that we want to encourage our industry to try and be competitive in the world. We don't want to put any shackles around it. Ease of doing business is touted as the more important thing as the regulator than protecting public health. So that's where the culture comes from.
Mr. Thakur, what I want to address here with you specifically on this issue, and I think that's something that both Prashant and you were talking about. One, of course, is compliance with good manufacturing practices as far as the manufacturing facilities are concerned. The other, specific to this challenge, this scourge of DEG poisoning, seems to be one of supply chain regulation. Now, how much of a lacuna, how much of a vacuum do we find ourselves when we talk about supply chain regulation specific to the pharma industry? Mr. Thakur.
So you cannot separate out supply chain regulation from good manufacturing practices, right? For example, GMP says that when you get raw materials delivered to you, which you use in your manufacturing, you do your testing. You make sure that the raw materials that you're getting are of a certain purity, certain standard, right? 9 out of 10 times when we run into situations of this nature, we find out that the company that actually has made adulterated product, substandard product, they have not tested it properly. That is GMP, right? I mean, my heart goes out to this, this parents of the 66 children, that someone will have to explain to them that the reason why they had poison in their cough syrup was because some company decided not to test the raw materials. How do you do that? It's as simple as that. And that is what GMP is. GMP basically says that you follow these set of standards and practices. Unfortunately, our regulations and our compliance is horrible when it comes to this.
Yeah, one of course is the law itself and the other is the enforcement with standards and regulation, two different things entirely. You may have laws on the book, you may have regulations on the book, but then enforcement is a different story altogether. And Prashant, that's where I want to come back again to state capacity specifically. As Ekta was pointing out, over 3,000 pharmaceutical companies, that's the number that we have, over 10,000 manufacturing facilities. Do we even have the capacity, especially at the state level, to be able to enforce?
Oh, no. That's the simple answer. We don't have it. And it also varies across states. So one of the findings of this book is that some of the southern states actually do a pretty good job. Tamil Nadu and Karnataka and Kerala especially. At least they test and they do try to prosecute few of these guys. But in a lot of other states, the state of the testing laboratories is just shocking. Like Bihar just doesn't have the basic testing equipment, and that's a state of more than 100 million people. Similarly, Himachal Pradesh, which is the hub of manufacturing, pharma manufacturing in India, because the government has given them an excise-free zone over there. The lab in that, they have only one testing lab, the state government, and when we file an RTI application asking them about what kind of tests they were doing, it turns out that they weren't doing some of the most basic tests. So that's the problem. As long as we leave it to state governments, we are going to have this, differentiated system of regulation across the country. The only way we can try and fix this is by trying and centralizing regulation. In most countries in the world, if there is a common market where drugs can flow from one state or one province to another, there will be a common federal regulator which is setting standards and enforcing the law. And also, let's remember that the central government generally has a lot more money to spend on drug regulation. For state governments, drug regulation comes right at the bottom of its list of priorities.
Okay. Mr. Reddy, I think you would be best placed to talk about the fact that what exactly is the stringent punishment or the punishment that exists right now if in case there is a substandard or spurious drug found by your company per se in India. According to what I've learned, it's around 10 years of imprisonment and a 10 lakh rupee fine. One, do you think that it is imposed? And two, is that the case? And what is the sense from a legal perspective? Does that needs to become more stringent? Does that need to have more teeth in order to create more fear in the system for compliance?
See, well, for cases like adulterated drugs, such as this particular case, which would qualify as an adulterated drug in Indian law, in 2008, the law was amended to allow even for life in prison for people found responsible for manufacturing adulterated drugs. But the bulk of the quality problem in India is substandard drugs, right? So these are drugs which may not kill you, but which may not work and hence have an adverse effect on your health. So for those kind of cases, the law is actually quite lenient. It says minimum 1 year imprisonment, maximum 2 years. But what we discovered, and this was absolutely stunning, that in several states, including in Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Tamil Nadu, where drug inspectors do prosecute these cases quite vigorously, even when companies are found guilty or when they plead guilty, the common sentence given by judicial magistrates is simple imprisonment till the rising of the court and a fine of about 20,000, 40,000 rupees. Now, simple imprisonment till the rising of the court sounds exactly like what it means. That is, if the judge gets up for lunch, you're free to go home after you pay your fine. So we are treating the pharma industry with kid gloves. It's just shocking that this hasn't gotten more attention in the past. which is why, unfortunately, these kids in Gambia are paying the price for our country's incompetence.
Yeah, that is, it is unfortunate. It is tragic. It really is a travesty that we've seen fatalities continue, not just in India, but in the world as well. Of course, in your book, you talk about the many instances of DEG poisoning. 1937 in the US is where it started. South Africa, 1969. Nigeria, 1990. Again, 2008. Bangladesh, 1990 to 1992. Argentina, 1992. Haiti, 1996. Panama, 2007. But India, we've seen DEG poisoning cases from 1972 all the way to 2025 cases of mass poisoning of a DEG. But Mr. Thakur, let me come back to you now and address this very issue that Prashant was talking about. In the last case of DEG contamination, DEG poisoning, the Jammu incident that we talked about, the company in question, as per the data put together in your book, there were more than a dozen violations that were flagged by regulators at the state level. Different states, not the state regulator in question. Even in this case of this company in question, there have been other state regulators that have red flagged this company in question. And yet, there doesn't seem to be any action. You filed an RTI as well to try and understand where the regulatory process seems to be. No response?
Well, I mean, as Prashant said, right, getting either the state drug regulator or the central regulator to act in a transparent manner is like pulling teeth. It never happens. We found 13 instances of this company being cited for making not of standard quality drugs in the government's own data. There was a journalist report that actually found 19 of them. And because, as you know, government data is incomplete, only 3 states report to the national database. There were 19 instances where this company was found to be manufacturing not of standard quality drugs. But that didn't stop, the government from the Himachal Pradesh drug controller from yanking out their manufacturing licenses, right, before they made this poisonous syrup being administered to young kids. Not just that, it's been 2 years, as Ekta said, right? It's been over 2 years right now. What is the consequence? I mean, you can always blame the judicial system to say, look, our courts languish, because, we don't prosecute in a timely manner. But the evidence here is it's black and white, as it gets, right? It's a question of intent. It's a question of, the drug regulator acting on behalf of public health rather than promoting ease of doing business. Unfortunately, that's what our drug regulators do today. They talk about ease of doing business rather than protecting public health. And so nothing changes. I mean, I'm sorry to tell you this. I mean, you're doing a great program today. A few days from now, a week from now, this is going to be off the air. Everybody's going to forget about it, and we'll go back and doing our own thing. Medicine regulation is not, anybody's priority, and unless there is political will to try and change the system, nothing will change. That was the reason why we wrote this book. We wanted to get this data in front of lay people of the country.
Yeah, I agree with what you say, Dinesh Thakur, but, here at CNBC-TV18, as you know, we've been running Bad Medicine, putting the spotlight on some of these issues for the last several years. And, of course, Ekta does a weekly called The Medicine Box, which also puts the spotlight on some of these issues. But, we do hope that, and at this point in time, for the benefit of our viewers, all we know is that the Indian regulator, the Indian drug regulator and the state regulator are now probing this issue, or looking into the issue of Maiden Pharma. What we're given to understand at this point in time, and there is no conclusive sort of statement from either the company or from the government or the regulator to say that these cough syrups have not been administered in the Indian market. What we're given to understand that they are unlikely to have been available in the Indian market. The WHO, of course, in its press release has said that so far the identified drugs have been identified in Gambia, but through informal routes, they may have found their way into other markets. So they have asked regulators around the world to pull these drugs from the market if they do identify them. But that is where this story stands at this point in time. We will, of course, keep you updated on how things develop. Dinesh Thakur, Prashant Reddy, thanks very much for joining us here on this conversation. As I said, it's an awful coincidence. I wish we didn't have to talk about this as we talk about your book, but thanks very much for joining us here today. That's it then on this special edition of The Bad Medicine. We will see you again shortly. Till then, from all of us here on CNBC-TV18, goodbye. Thanks for watching.